Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, friends. It's Wednesday, September 9th, and it's with great pleasure that I have invited today Julia Ciardullo, who works for the chair of the C40 Cities for Mayor Eric Garcetti, who leads his work around the C40 cities. So, for some of you, this might be a new organization that you're just becoming acquainted to, or this is something that you're very familiar with. But I have invited Julia so that she can answer our questions and she can tell us more about what the C40 is, what is the role of C40, how influential is C40, the role of the chair, and a lot more. So thank you so much for joining us today, Julie. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and tell you a little bit more about C40. How are you today?
I'm doing good. It's hot in LA, but I guess it's not as hot as it was this weekend. So I feel that this topic is very timely right now, especially around climate change and the extreme heat and the fires in California.
That's right. I think the weather will only get more extreme, and climate change is obviously a big issue on people's minds, particularly here in LA after this week's heat wave. And C40, I serve as the director of the office of the C40 chair, and C40 is an organization. It's now in its 15th year. It is composed of 96 mayors from around the world, leading mayors, some of the world's biggest cities, all committed to fighting climate change and being part of this amazing network where mayors can really share their lessons learned, live through others' eyes and implement best practices in their cities to really try to address the climate emergency in the most bold and feasible ways possible. And C40 Cities, because it is 96 of the world's largest cities, represents over 700 million of the world's urban residents and 25% of the world's GDP, which is incredible when you really think about just the reach of what their mayors really can touch as they're implementing these climate actions.
Yeah, it seems really influential. And I mean, I'm in this world of the environment and environmental justice, fighting climate change, bringing more renewables to the world. So C40 is something that I know, but I don't really know the history of C40 or how it was formed. So can you tell us a little bit about how C40 got founded, or what was the reason, or where?
Yeah, I mean, it was founded originally by the mayor of London at the time, and really with the idea that mayors have so much impact in their cities, and what if they got together with other mayors? Now I say it's 96 cities. At one point, it was 40 cities, which is where the name came from. But it has grown now to this organization of almost 100 cities. And, as you mentioned before, Mayor Garcetti, our mayor here in the city of Los Angeles, is the chair of the organization. He has been for about 9 months now. He took over as chair back in December of 2019. His chairmanship is between 2 and 3 years. It's 2 years with the possibility of an extension. And through that time, he really has the opportunity to shape the strategic direction of the organization, lead where this group of 96 mayors, takes climate change on the global stage and how they really represent that global voice, the political leadership of the world. And to really influence how cities are implementing climate action around the world. The organization is, headed by the chair, that's Mayor Garcetti, but it's also led by 16 other vice chairs that serve on a steering committee, something that Mayor Garcetti also served on for many years before he ran for chair. And that steering committee of vice chairs is made up of mayors from all over the world. And C40 is broken down into 7 regions, Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, North America. I mean, regions all over the world, of course. And there's mayors from each of these regions serving on the steering committee. So it is diverse, it is inclusive, and it brings all of these different perspectives and voices to the table, regional priorities, different ways of addressing issues within very unique situations in cities, but ones that can be implemented in different places to really bring that knowledge to bear across the world.
That is incredible. And as we know, in the work of addressing our current climate crisis, we know that as we act locally, we also need to think globally and the other way. So this is a really great organization to kind of reach and bring local work from all around the world, from the mayors, right? And also coordinate their environmental justice work all around. So if the C40 was created today, so then it will be C100 instead of C40, I guess. Because right now it's 100 cities. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think they're sticking with the C40 name for now, and there's certainly as cities reach out to C40 and meet the population thresholds and want to join and can really demonstrate commitment to climate action, the organization of course can grow. The one thing I should mention, I mean, it's a membership organization in the sense that there's a lot of international organizations that focus on climate and that have member cities, member mayors, and that are much larger. C40 it prides itself on being a membership organization, which means that every single city within the network must meet the membership requirements that are set out by C40.
And what are some of those requirements?
So the key requirement is something that was implemented a few years ago, and folks here may be familiar with COP, which is the Conference of the Parties. It's where nation states come together and set targets for climate change. And at the COP that was hosted in Paris in 2015, it was really established that that we need to establish, or we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And so what C40 said was, I mean, of course, that the Paris Agreement is for nation states, but we as cities really have a big part in ensuring that goal and targets are met. And so all C40 cities, and this is something that, the steering committee, as I talked about, of C40 had undertaken and approved, requiring that all members of the organization, so all 96 members, will have to, by 2020, put in place a climate action plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And so in Los Angeles, some of you may be familiar with LA's Green New Deal.
Right.
That is something that Mayor Garcetti initially released 4 years ago and then updated this previous year. But really with, that goal in mind, that we need to hit that target. And that is the city's climate action plan that is in compliance with that membership requirement. And C40 calls it Deadline 2020. And that is because the requirement is that those climate action plans be in place by the end of 2020 this year. So this is the year. This is the year that we are all racing to get to meet those targets, to meet those goals. We're very positive about, where we are with the cities in the network. So many cities have already released their climate action plans, and we really expect that so many more will by the end of this year or early next year, just due to COVID. But it is an incredible feat, and I think something that really speaks to the power of cities in implementing action and driving change, particularly when, we do have some national governments that are not acting with such urgency and support for climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so let me see if I gather this correctly, and I see some comments in the chat right now. So if you are watching, we're talking to Julie Ciardullo, who is the director of the Office of the Chair, which is Mayor Garcetti, for the C40 Cities organization. And so all of the cities that are part of the C40, all the 100 cities that are part of the C40 right now are putting together climate plans that are adding up to this goal that collectively they pick, I guess, every year when they meet or such. Some folks are asking on the chat, and I see here, questions around accountability, I guess I would say. So how can we ensure, or how do we ensure that all 100 cities are really committed to the climate goals that you guys set? Is this the role of the chair too? Does he kind of goes around and tell other mayors like, hey, don't forget to submit your plan. We're like going through a climate disaster, or how does that work?
It's a really great question. And it's certainly been such a huge focus of C40. So much of their time and resources, staff support has been really focused around how they can support cities in putting these climate action plans together. Some cities, a number of cities, receive direct support. For example, Los Angeles received from C40 a climate advisor that was placed in the city to actually help develop the targets and deliverables that were part of the plan. There's also, shared resources throughout the various networks within C40. But I will say that it is the top priority of C40 this year to really support their cities in putting these plans together.
Amazing.
There were 9 pilot cities when this was first announced a couple of years back. LA was one of them, and a lot of those cities have already released their plans. Other cities are coming along. And to your question about whether it is the chair's responsibility, it is certainly something that he takes very seriously. For example, he has followed up with some cities who still need additional support. We're really working together to see what the gaps in support may be and how we can fill them. And, whether it's political support or technical support, what is it that, each individual city uniquely needs in order to meet their climate action goals. So there is a lot of, we're not telling cities to just go and do this with no handholding and no support, no resources, no information. It's certainly something that we're very focused on. And the vice chairs, as I mentioned, also because they are in every region of the world, they've been incredibly helpful and engaged in, for example, we have vice chairs in Europe from both London and Milan. And if there's a city in Europe who is just either not able to or having trouble meeting their deadlines, those 2 vice chairs have really been very active in trying to secure whatever resources or understand what support is needed in order to meet that target by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I know that in my native Colombia, where I'm from, some of my Colombian cities are part of the C40, which makes me very proud to see. And I see that in the comments, some folks have shared that in Tucson, for example, Arizona, the mayors and the city council are voting on a climate emergency. So this is definitely in the hearts and minds of folks. I think we can all agree on that. And I think we can also agree that locally is how we've been able to continue fighting climate change in the face of having a federal level, a federal government that has such little appreciation or just commitment to fight climate change and really address our current climate emergency. So some folks here are asking, and this is an interesting question I want to ask about goals. Mm-hmm. So if we set goals for, there are all sorts of goals. Some of us are very ambitious with our goals. We want it right now. Some other people say, well, we're going to hurt the economy. Other people say, well, there's a lot of theories about how to choose climate response goals. Some folks in the comments are asking or are basically stating that 2050 plans might be a little outdated at this point. So what is the role of the C40, the chair, on making sure that we have goals that are really at the level of urgency that we have right now when it comes to climate change?
It's absolutely true. I will also say that, in thinking in the last couple of years, as we've been thinking towards the net zero target by 2050, it has become increasingly apparent that in order to get there, we need to set interim goals. So to your question, something that C40 is now, requiring is that cities or the commitment that we are looking at as an interim goal towards the 2050 target is to have emissions by 2030. And so that is something that we have now been incorporating into climate action plans, commitments, declarations of C40. Now, of course, there's a lot of cities like Los Angeles that want to go even further. So to your question, of course, like I think, and cities that have the resources to do so absolutely should. And in a place like LA, we're being pushed even further on specific targets like renewable energy and things that the city itself has to comply with or that wants to mandate that's even stricter than that. And I think, C40 is incredibly supportive of that. The sort of broad targets are set so that we can set targets so that cities can comply and then sort of designate and determine their own interim targets and then also, more specific and more ambitious targets to the extent that they can really meet them. Because it is an organization that spans the globe, there's also the consideration of cities that are developing versus developed. Developed cities really being ahead of the game in terms of thinking about how they have started to implement climate action plans, and perhaps developed nations or developing cities, I should say, who haven't contributed as much to the climate emergency and are only now starting to think about how they can put plans in place to make their cities more sustainable. And so those overarching targets are intended to be, for cities across the world, and then more specific targets established by the cities themselves and supported by C40, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you ended up in this work? What's your story or your connection to the work of the C40 cities?
Yeah, I mean, I always was interested in working in the climate change field. I actually grew up in a very small town in upstate New York, where it was very rural, and we were really connected to nature. So I feel that from a very early age, we had a mindset of conservation, and I, as a young kid, wanted to be an environmental defense attorney. Went to law school and really focused my studies on that and my career on that. And after law school and after having worked for a law firm for a few years, ended up joining an academic think tank where I got to work on climate change law. And that was in New York City. When I moved to Los Angeles, really looked for a similar job in the field and had trouble finding it, and was really drawn to a then councilman named Eric Garcetti, who was running for mayor, and just was very impressed with his environmental record, and ended up joining his team. And I was in various roles in his office and just really saw his commitment to sustainability from the very beginning, as I said, even as a councilman. And then, as mayor, established the city's first ever chief sustainability officer position. And through an executive directive, he ordered each of his city departments to also have a chief sustainability officer. And the list goes on. And when I found out that he was applying as the chair of C40 and running for that election, and was offered a position on his sustainability team to help see that through, and then afterwards to take over his office of the C40 chair, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. So I've been in this role now for about a year, and no looking back.
And he's very lucky to have you, I have to say. And Mayor Garcetti has something very beautiful as part of something that is very innate to his almost skills and vision and leadership. He also, I have to say personally, as a testament that he has been committed to environmental justice and environmental issues ever since I met him also when I worked for the Sierra Club. And, later when he took a chance on me to appoint me to the Department of Water and Power position as a commissioner, and all of the work that I was able to do to create a solar for renters program, equity metrics. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that we're the only utility in the country that has a measure to make sure that we have, real accountability, and that we can always, with our incentives and our programs, favor or start with the people that are in most need in Los Angeles. he also, I was a big part of the process of bringing about the Green New Deal and retiring the 3 coastal gas plants in, here in LA, that were polluting our communities of color, and we're just not really giving as much as we really need it right now. So I can definitely attest to his commitment. And for some of us might be not enough, and for some other people is bold. But I think that we have a political player here that is really committed to fight climate change and make it local, and also utilize an equity lens, which I'm going to ask you in just a minute. But since we are in the topic of the chair, how does a chair get elected in the C40?
Yeah, no, I think the equity piece, you've really highlighted exactly why Mayor Garcetti's platform is so comprehensive, and certainly happy to talk about that. He was elected chair. He's elected by the steering committee, that body of 16 global mayors that I mentioned earlier. And you have to run for election. You have to run. You have to submit a letter of interest, is what they call it. You have to submit letters of support, essentially letters of recommendation from other mayors from around the world, from different regions, on the steering committee, and then also not on the steering committee, from different regions. And we were able to really solicit endorsements from mayors all around the world who supported his chairmanship. He was a vice chair, I think I mentioned, for several years before that, so had really had that opportunity to showcase his leadership leading up to his chairmanship, and he won. He was elected in June of last year and officially took over in December.
I got to go to his party when he became a chair, so that was very cool. And again, I wanted to bring you in to educate us about what the C40 is, because there's a lot of people that didn't know what the C40 is, and how the chair gets elected, how important this role is, which I want you to touch a little bit about that. How important is the C40 around the world? That this is not just something small. That actually we have a mayor that is really committed, and a mayor that is holding a pretty important global position. But I'm gonna let you maybe tease it out more in terms of how instrumental or how important is this role around the global and the national, community.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's exactly right. This is C40. I really feel, and I've heard Mayor Garcetti say too, it is the most important climate change organization right now, and that is precisely because it is an organization of mayors. It is an organization that is based on political leadership, that has that political leadership around the globe to really implement action at the local level, but also at the global level. And certainly at a time like now, when cities are the ones that are taking action and that are really implementing change, this is the organization that can make the difference. And we see it because, you see there are a number of other organizations that are, demanding things of national governments or fighting with each other. And C40 mayors have really brought the coalition together. They work with businesses, they work with labor unions, they work with youth activists, all sorts of other organizations, members of civil society, and just members of the general public. And they're really able to be that coalition builder because we're nonpartisan, group of mayors who are, like I said, implementing action in their cities, and really who have the power and the voice and the global platform and stage to make that change. So I appreciate that, and I completely agree. I think it is it's a huge deal, and it really benefits LA in a number of ways too. I mean, if you think about it, C40, just being part of the network, we get so many resources here as the city to help us implement our policies. Then we can broadcast LA policies, which are, really so far ahead of what so many other cities are doing. And other cities can learn from us, but at the same time, we can learn from them. I mean, certainly there are cities that are doing so many amazing and bold and unique actions on climate change. And we have access to all those resources through this platform that we have now taken this leadership role with. And so it benefits the city in so many ways, but it also allows for that dialogue that we have seen in the last few months is just so necessary for us to get through the multiple crises that we are in right now, and just being able to speak to each other and share with each other, learn from each other, and really just get through this together.
Yeah, there is so much innovation around the cities that you see, especially cities that see the economic impact of climate change. So it's exciting that we get to collaborate with them as well. So we are speaking to Julie Ciardullo. She is the director of our very, very C40 chair for the C40 Cities organization. She has been working with, who is Mayor Garcetti. She has been working with us, with Mayor Garcetti now for a while, moving his agenda and his priorities, which is something that I want to ask you next. And for the folks that are also watching and sharing and making comments, I see all sorts of things going on. Feel free to post your questions in the comments for Julie around the C40 chair and the role of C40 in our environmental, for our environmental priorities. So tell me, what is the priorities that Mayor Garcetti has right now as it relates to, being the chair of the C40?
His key priority is really to take the concept of the Green New Deal and take it global.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what he refers to as the global Green New Deal. Mm-hmm. That term resonates really well in the United States and some other places, maybe not as well in others. And so the way that we really talk about it is around the concepts that are behind it. And with LA's Green New Deal, it's really around the environment, it's around equity, and it's around the economy. Mm-hmm. And that really translates the global Green New Deal as well. It's the concept of addressing environmental degradation and doing it in a way that is equitable. Mm-hmm. And the mayor talks about it with two questions: will there be a world to sustain me, and will there be an economy for me to live in? And really thinking around
that is really key. Hold on, let me soak on those two, because that is really important. And I feel that this is where we all can find common ground, bipartisan, common ground, whether you are a Republican, Democrat, whether you believe that it's a hoax. Am I going to have a world that I'm going to live in? And am I going to have an economy that I'm going to sustain? So that's a really good, excellent questions, principles.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's about the environment. It's about conservation. It's about ensuring and of course, this is a huge topic for everyone on everyone's mind right now, public health. Mm-hmm. But it's also about jobs. It's about ensuring that our economy is based on, good paying green jobs that are sustainable, that support workers, that support families, and how we can tie those two together in all of the, environmental policies that we are looking at. And how do we also look at equities? How do we inequities? There are vulnerable communities that have really suffered the brunt of climate change, and how do we support them? How do we bring them in to that inclusive economy that we are creating? Mm-hmm. And so that framework from his local Green New Deal is really what he has undertaken as his major priority and his agenda as the chair of C40 as well, and something that cities around the world and mayors around the world have really embraced the concepts. We've seen, almost virtually, unanimous support for the concept of needing to have an equity lens, mm-hmm. and to be inclusive when we are looking at climate policies and addressing the climate emergency. This is really even more relevant, I think, today, given the COVID crisis, than it was when he took over as chair at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we've certainly been discussing at length as we think about a recovery from COVID and how to make sure that recovery is green, it is sustainable, but it's also equitable and just.
Yeah.
And that is something, I can also talk a little bit, if you'd like, about how his agenda has translated in that post-COVID sort of recovery through.
Definitely, because there is a lot of us that are asking for the next stimulus in whichever shape or form that is going to show up to be green, sustainable, to be also that will benefit first working class people, people that have been most affected by COVID-19. And those people are the same people that are most affected by climate change. So we're definitely, there's a movement around asking for, like, this is the time where we can have a Green New Deal. So what are some of the things that he wants to focus on?
Yeah, well, I will say, so, when the pandemic started, or at least it started to become apparent that it was becoming a major issue, back in March, April of this year, he really, he was the, as the chair of C40, he was the convener of several, mayors, what we call webinars, where mayors just got together on Zoom to talk about their challenges and what they were thinking about. And something that we saw, we had our first Zoom call and there were 50 mayors from around the world on this call. It was honestly incredible, but something that we continued to hear from mayors as they were addressing the immediate the immediate COVID pandemic and public health crisis was, we need to start thinking ahead to the recovery, because we know it's coming. And even though we have to, be focused on what we're doing here, we need to start thinking about how to build that recovery, and what mayors can do. And so Mayor Garcetti directed C40 to form a task force to look at what cities can do and how they can implement policies in their city that not only address public health, but also worked to rebuild and really reimagine their cities as part of the COVID recovery in a sustainable and just way, as we've been talking about, really based on the principles of the Global Green New Deal. And so that task force, which is made up of mayors, again, from around the world, we've ensured that, every region is represented, has been meeting monthly since April to really come to some conclusions about what cities can do, and informed by world-renowned experts from all over the world. And back in July, put out a report, which was the first report they will be issuing around what cities can do to implement a green and just recovery. It's called the C40 Mayors Agenda, and I can send you the link to where folks can find this.
I think I got it here. If this is the report.
Yeah, and the report is called the C40 Mayors Agenda for a Green and Just Recovery. It's really comes in two parts. So it first, in the first part, details what cities are already doing and what they can do to support a green and just recovery. And it was based on input from not just the task force and the experts that they were consulting with, but all C40 cities through a needs assessment that was circulated to every mayor in the network about what it is, what are their priorities, what are they thinking about, what do they need, and sort of what are their goals for the recovery and getting through the COVID pandemic. And what we heard and what the report really outlines and highlights is that jobs and an inclusive economy is the number one priority. And so it really focuses around how to create green jobs, how to support, workforce training for jobs that are transitioning. It also focuses on equity, as we've talked about, and resilience. And there, the focus is on supporting public services for all, especially essential workers, vulnerable communities. Something that is championed in the report is around public transit and just really the need for cities to support public transit, which of course during COVID, can be challenging, but to really find ways to make public transit safe for their residents. And then it also talks about public health and the need to open green spaces, open, our streets, take back those public spaces for folks who just need a place to be outside and to have those healthy open air places for people to gather. That's part one. Part two is also related, but it's asks of national governments and international institutions. So to your point about the stimulus, what should mayors be demanding of their governments and of international institutions? And I'd say the key highlights from that section are: one, the recovery has to be a green one. And two, national governments must end all investments in fossil fuel subsidies. And that is certainly how, if governments were to do that, how they could, afford to, pay for some of the recommendations in the report.
Transition to the green economy. Yeah, that is always such a sticky point with the folks that are currently working on the extracting economy, the fossil fuel industry, to move them to push or to transform them or to really create a just transition that works for them. So it's exciting to hear that this is part of the plan, because I'm sure you're very familiar with this, that we always get a lot of pushback from labor workers around getting how fast we can get to a green economy. So it's good to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I was mentioning before too, I think because of C40's strong relationships with labor, for example, and also businesses and different other, organizations and coalitions, during the launch of this report, it was supported by international labor institutions as a path forward for the green and just recovery, and something that we certainly are continuing to, through our diplomatic channels, work with national governments to really push for some of the recommendations in the report.
Yeah. So, we now learn more about what C40 is. For some of us now, we have a clear understanding of what it is. For some others, maybe this is the first time we hear about the C40. So how can anyone that is watching get more involved? I see people watching from Arizona. I know that there are people watching from the East Coast. So how can they get involved? Or is there an opportunity for everyday people to participate, to shape the way that their mayors are influenced? What if their mayor is not yet on the C40? How can they push, from a everyday lay person, be part of this process?
Yeah, I think everyone absolutely has the power to make an impact and should get involved. I would say the key number one thing to do is to vote. Nationally, locally, vote for the candidate who, puts these policies forward, who prioritizes climate change and equity, and who understands that a green recovery is really the only way forward. And in addition to that, there's ways to get involved, I think, with local government too. It's something that, working in local government, I feel very much that you make the biggest impact at the local level. And I'm sure you would agree with me,
Yes,
through
absolutely.
the DWP Commission. Absolutely. So volunteer, I know in LA, there's the Mayor's Volunteer Corps, but there's certainly, I'm sure in Arizona or on the East Coast, wherever you're listening from, volunteer locally and just make sure you vote.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, for giving us some food for thought, for sharing a little bit about your life with us also. I think we're in such uncertain times, and it's important for us to also share how we got to this work, so that we all see that actually we have more communality than differences. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye when it comes to the environment and protecting our planet, not because we are actually much different, but because of other ideas and other, I'll call it some ignorance sometimes, that really reflects the decisions that we make. I'm very lucky to say that we live in a city with a mayor that actually takes this very seriously, but it's our work, like you said, to vote, to get out there, to push, and to be part of the process. And this is how we also can fight, climate change and bring a better climate emergency.
Absolutely. And if anyone is interested in keeping in touch with C40, of course, C40 website and is c40.org, and you can follow C40 Cities as well at C40 Cities. Keep in touch, learn about what different mayors around the world are doing, learn about opportunities to get involved, learn about events that you can participate in, and yeah, no, just I completely agree with that sentiment. Just get involved, stay involved. This is an emergency, and we certainly need to address it with the urgency that it demands.
So when some news come along, Julie, let us know so we can have you back, and we can have another dialogue and learn more and see how we can further support, of course, your work and the work of the mayor.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all of the questions that viewers submitted. It's so great to see all of your engagement, and please continue to stay engaged on this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Hey.
Bye.
So that was our conversation about the C40 cities and the role of Mayor Garcetti as the chair. You heard it yourself. The mayor is really invested in bringing a Green New Deal that is equitable, that is sustainable. We all have to push for a next stimulus package and a stimulus that is green, that is going to benefit the people that are most affected by COVID-19, by climate change, and that deserve also a beautiful planet. We all deserve a healthy and beautiful and prosperous planet to live in. So I hope everybody enjoy it. I mean, the conversation doesn't end here. You can continue with your comments and your questions in all of my social media channels. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll see you all next Wednesday. Bye-bye.